David, good morning. It's good to see you.
Yeah, Guido, good morning. Yes, it's a lovely day here and really good to see you as well. Lovely.
Thank you, David, for agreeing for this interview, and I'm looking forward to what you have to say to us.
It's a pleasure. It's a real pleasure, Guido. I'm delighted just to have this opportunity to share things that mean a lot to me.
I hope they will mean a lot to people listening in as well. David, to kick off, you have been a mission partner for many years, 17 years in Thailand, 17 years in Singapore, and now even in retirement, you still promote global mission. What motivated you? What made you go down this way?
Thank you for that. It's a long story, but I'll keep it short. Very simply, I became a Christian in my teens through the ministry of Billy Graham, and that was fine. Then I continued on in life, but I found myself drifting a little bit from the Lord, from God, from church, from everything. And as that took place, so my career eventually in my early 20s in human resource management was taking off. And there came a point when I was sharing a flat with three other single men in London. But I came back to my room one night, knelt down my bed and confessed that I could not make any sense of my life. It seemed to be meaningless. And I just committed my total life to the Lord. He could have everything, and he would be Lord of everything. And that was an absolute turning point for me. And so the journey began then, and it continued when I met Sue, my wife, who was a medical student. And we both had made a commitment that we would serve God wherever and however, wherever he put us, in whatever calling he gave to us. And that was the start of our journey. That took us to Thailand in 1970 and on, and it still motivates us deeply. I had a sense that I was convinced utterly that God deserved everything of my life, everything that I was, everything that I had. I wanted to serve him with Sue with my whole heart. And that kind of motivated me through our time in Asia and here back in the UK as well.
So you first ended up in Thailand. Why Thailand? What's so special about it, other than the beaches and the food and the nice people?
Yeah, well, you kind of summed it up, Guido, very astutely. Sue was a medical student when we first were married. She had one more year to complete. And our journey from marriage to Thailand was one of seeking God's will. And it was very clear that OMF was the mission that God was drawing us to. And that meant medical work, which was predominantly in Thailand. And so, with her medical skills and my own managerial background, the hospital in central Thailand was the obvious place. And we simply said to the leadership of the mission, look, you place us wherever you want us to be. We're willing to do whatever the Lord gives us the honor to do, to the privilege to invest our lives in. And that was the hospital. That's where we started. We went to Thailand with one 4-month-old baby. We had 2 more children. So medicine for Sue was wrapped around 3 little children and outpatients. I ran the hospital, but also had a very strong commitment to evangelism and church planting. And so at every opportunity, I was stimulated to be out preaching and teaching, as well as stimulating and helping medical staff to do the same. So that's really where we began our missionary life, and we spent our first 4 years there in Thailand. Great place. And the hospital was a center where hundreds would come. Outpatients would be 300-400 people almost every morning from far and wide. And so, as well as medical care, people were hearing about the Lord Jesus, whether it was preaching, whether it was one-on-one in outpatients, people waiting, bored, needed someone to sit down and talk, which we could do, whether it was following up people back into their villages, as a center for reaching out into the community. It was a great place with a great testimony. So that's where we began.
David, that must have been quite an interesting time, 17 years altogether in Thailand. Are there any particular events that stand out in your memory, both good and not so good?
Yes, may I adjust the word bad or not so good to perhaps good and things that were challenging. Perhaps challenging is a better phrase. We arrived in Thailand in 1970 when the whole of the Central Plain was under massive flood. The Jalpriar River had overflowed its banks, and Central Thailand, certainly where the hospital was under 10 feet of water. So actually our first challenge when we arrived was to go up from Bangkok to the hospital. We stepped out of a rickety bus right on the edge of what looked like an enormous lake. We got into rickety little Thai boats that are about half as wide as I am physically, and somebody paddled us across the water towards a dot, which was the hospital. I felt, I didn't say it to Sue, but I felt that martyrdom was coming rather soon in our career. But there were challenges. Thailand was not the backpackers' paradise then that it is now. It was electricity was erratic. Water, well, we were on a hospital, we had water, but other places water was stored in big stone jars. It wasn't on a tap. Violence was quite common, and the hospital, we saw a lot of violence, the evidence of violence in people coming with all kinds of injuries. So there were challenges there. There were no phones. In fact, our contact with our supporters back in the UK and with parents had to be only with those. Do you remember those blue airmail letters, Guido?
Yeah, you write with pen, don't you?
You wrote with pen, which I still do, but we every week you would write an airmail letter and get one back. So news up and so on was absent. And I've mentioned violence because I think perhaps one of the most challenging was the way in which, I think my maths is right, 24 OMF people in Thailand were killed, died in one violent way or another. There were those kidnapped, those who were shot on the trail. There were those that were taken and held to ransom and then executed. There were people with illnesses. And of course, for me, perhaps the most memorable and painful was the accident involving 12 colleagues, adults 5 and 7 children from the hospital that were killed outright in a road accident, including two surgeons from the medical team, which was a tremendous blow. But I have to say, having said that and called it a challenge, I think all of us went to Thailand with the expectation of those words from Paul: for me to live is Christ and to die is gain. So that, in a sense, I think we'd all surrendered our lives before we ever got to Thailand. And so you weren't kind of put off or put out. You saw this as part of, if this is what it takes to help build the Church of Jesus Christ, then we're willing and happy. Well, I won't say happy, but we understand the cost that's involved, and it doesn't destabilize you.
Oh, that's a huge price to pay, though, isn't it? Yeah. Could you see results out of that? Could you see? You just...
Yeah, yes, in all sorts of ways. In all sorts of ways. Some of them in terms of spiritual results in the country. The accident took place at a time when, as a mission, we had called for prayer for Thailand and for breakthrough in church planting and evangelism, to break through the unresponsiveness. And in that context, and with a national-wide evangelistic campaign planned, bang, came this accident. And we understood that as part of spiritual warfare. But the impact there, I think, was very profound. Perhaps locally, the one surviving surgeon who didn't go out that day lost his wife and two girls. His son was injured and brought into the hospital. And what impressed the Thai more than anything else was the fact that Brian put aside his own personal grief and went into operating theatre for those who came out of that accident injured and in great difficulty. And that commitment spoke volumes. Another outcome, do you mind if I just go on a little bit? Another outcome was one of the parents, Ian Gordon Smith's mother. Ian and Stephanie were our closest friends. So they died together with their children in the accident. Ian's mother wrote a book, and she's with the Lord now, so she won't mind me saying that OMF didn't want to publish the book. It wasn't that great. A little warning, if you want to write books, you never know. But I'll tell you this, she was encouraged, go ahead and publish it privately, that's fine. And I have traveled the world and I've spoken on mission, and I have come across all over the world people who have read that book and have been challenged by it. Did anything good come out of it? It absolutely did.
That's very, very challenging and encouraging at the same time. Thank you for sharing that, David.
Good things about Thailand is that, let me just say, you asked for the good thing. It's a country where you can preach the gospel up anywhere in the country. A multicultural country, great deal of mixed ethnicity and religions, but you have freedom to preach the gospel. I don't know too many places in the world where you have that opportunity. And for me, that was one of the most wonderful things.
But then you still had the beaches and the food.
Yeah, I have to say the food is still number one, and we still have Thai food here in our house when Sue cooks it. And yeah, the beach, of course, the beauty is something quite wonderful. And the Thai people are extraordinarily charming and polite and welcoming.
Thank you.
And love.
David, you then went on to spend 17 years in Singapore, and quite many of them were as a general director of the mission. As such, you will have met lots of other mission leaders, you will have seen lots of mission situations, etc. What were your observations of how missions developed over these years?
Yeah, I think we've seen a very significant change as the Lord has planted churches in Asia and grown churches in Asia. I think when we went in 1970, it was still, the paradigm was from the West to the East, and we went to different countries and to those countries, whoever was there. The big paradigm shift is that in the last 50 years or so, the Lord has multiplied the church in many areas. And two big shifts have happened. One is that we have moved from looking at countries from the West to the East, from mission now is from everywhere to everywhere. And I have seen how God has moved the Asian church to mobilize the Asian church into a world mission, so that the way mission is done very differently now. It has changed also in the way that we do mission, so that the opportunities for those with a professional skill to use that as a platform to reach people is a big change in mission. The partnerships that have evolved between West and East and so on. Let me give you an example of how I see the Lord mixing things together. To me, it's absolutely fascinating to see how the African churches, or at least some of the African churches, have come to OMF with a request. And here's the request. The African churches are seeing lots of Chinese in Africa, big mega projects, many Chinese. In fact, if you go to Malawi, where my son lives, and you step out of the airport in Lilongwe, there is a big welcome notice, one in English and the other in Chinese. Now, that tells you something. But the Africans have come to us and said, look, we don't know how to deal with Chinese. You work in Asia. You used to be the China Inland Mission. Come on. Will you help train us to reach the Chinese? You've got Africans, the Black Church, African Church. You've got Asians, and you've got OMF being a bridge, if you like. So that's a wonderful pattern. Guido, you know, because you were involved in this in the span of mission that is now from everywhere to everywhere. So we've got South Americans called of God to come to Asia and connecting with many others, but including OMF. The whole mission world is changing, and the Spirit of God, I think, is propelling us forward into a much more humble view of partnership, serving one another in order to multiply the gift, the experiences, and the power of God's church.
That's amazing, yeah. And as you say, that was my experience as well, traveling in those continents, to just see to experience the motivation, the desire, the enthusiasm of our brothers and sisters who wanted to be part of that mission movement. Yeah.
Let me add another footnote, because I just talking to one of our colleagues who has an Africa brief, although he's based in Germany. He was telling me how he has organized a community of African leaders and Asian leaders to meet, at the moment on Zoom, but to meet together to exchange insights on what God is doing in the African church and in the Asian church, how they can gain from each other's cultural insights, spiritual insights, experiences. And I just see that as an incredible development that mirrors, in my view, the way that God works in a multicolored, multicultural way. Friends, we're not lone rangers. We're not on our own. We have to work in intentional partnerships together.
David, my experience in the last few years or so traveling in this country and meeting with church leaders, many were saying, well, the world is now coming to us. And one in East London was saying, well, we have over 100 different ethnic groups just in our parish. And the implication was that, well, since the world is coming to us, we don't need to go to the world anymore. Would you say that global missions is coming to an end for Western countries?
I think that is such a myth. Listen, Sue and I were called finally, after lots of prayer and reading and waiting on God. We were called very directly at an OMF conference at which an Asian brother was bringing the gospel, the message, the Bible teaching. And he spoke from Romans 1 and Paul's words, I am a debtor to the whole world. And that challenged us, an Asian brother speaking to us. Friends, there's so much that we could learn from the wealth of diversity that God has brought to us if we're willing to listen and sit at their feet and be honest, good listeners and good servers. No, world mission hasn't finished. It will not finish until, as Jesus said, this gospel has been preached throughout the whole world, and then the end will come. God has a world missionary heart, a world missionary view. He so loved the world that he gave his son. And our commitment is to follow him. Mission is God's work, and it's there until he says time is up and the task is complete. But there's so much we could learn from those who come into our country, into our realm of experience. I'm just afraid, if I'm really honest, that we could be very protective of ourselves and of the way we do things, that we fail to listen, observe, and learn, and therefore receive the blessings that will come through other people to us.
So would this be the message that you want to leave for churches and for believers in this country?
I have one message really, and that is, whether I'm preaching on mission, it is to urge people first to give themselves to the Lord and let him place you where he wants you to be. And I would say, keep your eyes as wide and your horizons as broad as possible. You know, Jesus spoke several times to his disciples. He said, you're not looking properly. Lift up your eyes. Look, see, open your eyes, because you need God to baptize your eyes to see the world as he sees it. You know, we should be absolutely heartbroken as we look at our world and see the injustices, the poverty, the disbelief, the idolatry, the corruption, the greed. We should be grieved that God is robbed of his glory in his world. And we should be really heartbroken that so many people do not know the name of the Lord Jesus. So my message will always be that. I'd like to think that with Charles Wesley's hymn, happy with my latest breath, I may but gasp his name and cry to all, behold, behold the Lamb. I think that's how I would like to continue.
I hope that won't happen too soon. We want to keep you down here for a bit longer. But David, that was very, very encouraging, very interesting. And I would like to thank you for your honesty and openness to share with us.
Not at all. It was a real pleasure to be with you, Guido. Thank you.